Hi, everyone. Welcome to the At Hurston Mom podcast. I'm Lauren Rose, and today we're talking to Christina Smith. Christina is a life coach specializing in confidence and self love in midlife so that women can finally truly like themselves and how they show up for themselves in their relationships. She's helped people move through tough transitions in coaching and with her book, Inviting Shift. Her focus is on helping women to empower themselves so they can make their second half the best half by dropping the people pleasing and perfection and stepping into desire, authenticity, and joy. Christina is also the host of the Inviting Shift podcast, a place for midlife women to embrace their uniqueness and truth with confidence. The mission is to help women reinvent midlife so we can revolutionize how we see aging and ourselves as we age. She encourages people to be more gentle with their humanness so they can truly shine the way they choose to without gratitude lists or toxic positivity. Thank you for coming on, Christina.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to, I'm excited and hesitant to talk about it because who wants to talk about mother shame?
Yeah, I know. I'm hoping I'm not going to cry too much during this episode, but I think it's going to be pretty vulnerable and very authentic. So, why don't you start by telling us whatever you want to tell us about yourself and about the health issues that you've had?
Yeah, so in my health issues go way back. I got really good at ignoring health issues because you would go to the
Mm.
doctor and they would give you a pill. And so, like, I would get migraines in my 20s and they just gave me a pill. I had joint problems, they just gave me a pill. But in my 30s, I had these serious gut issues where I would have to go to the hospital to the ER like 3, 4 times a year. And even when I was done at the ER, I was in bed for like a month after that. Now, part of it was depression, but a lot of it was just I had serious gut issues and nobody could tell me what it was. Every doctor had a different diagnosis and nothing they were doing was helping. So I went through several years of this, and it happened to be right after I remarried for the second time. And so our household was changing. I have a son from my first marriage, and our household was changing. And the first 7 years of my son's life, like we had been active. We had gone, to the zoo. We saw the Wiggles, we went to Sesame Street. We did a lot of the things that I saw myself as a mother doing, right? Like these things that we want to do, these good times that we have with our kids. And then suddenly I started getting sick a lot and I was in bed a lot. And I never felt so guilty, I guess is the word, or shame about having to be in bed, and not having the energy to get up and go do the things that I wanted to do. I brushed off a lot of things onto my new husband, so his stepfather, and I really felt guilty about it. I didn't want to go to the baseball games. I didn't want to go to the wrestling practice. I didn't want to do all of those things that I know as a mother I would really want to do, but I really, even though I tried and I pushed, it usually just made me sicker. And so I had to step back from that stuff. And then shortly after that, when my son was about 13, he decided he wanted to go live with his dad. So then I had this shame that
Mm.
like it's probably because, I started making up all kinds of stories like we do. Probably because, I can't do the things that he wants me to, or this house isn't as much fun because we all know that when we're not feeling well, fun in the house, it kind of comes down a bit, right? And so I had all of this guilt for not becoming the mother that I wanted to be. And when my son moved across the country to be with his dad, I went through one of the deepest depressions I think I've ever had. And that was really, really challenging for me. Today, my son's 21 and we have a different relationship, but it took a lot of work for me between, that time and, today, which is, I guess, 8 years later, for me to really forgive myself for that, to show up the way that I want to in the ways that I can. And I think that that's really the important thing is that we can't always have the dream that we wanted, but we can still have intentions so that we show up the way that we we are at least giving what we want them to remember about us, right? I don't think that we take our kids to the Wiggles or Sesame Street or the zoo so that they can be like, oh, mom took me all these cool places. We take them there because we want them to know that we love them, that they're safe, that their joy is important to us. And we can still do those things even when we're sick. And that's what I had to start forgiving myself, that it didn't look the way that I wanted it to, but my son still felt loved and safe. And, he still had a lot of joy, even though I was sick. And that was what was important to me.
I love how you say being able to do what we can in the way or in the way that things that we want in the way that we can, because a lot of times those are mutually exclusive, or at least we think they are. We either are going to do all the things that we want to do, we're going to be the room parent and take them to all these places and be an active parent, or we're going to focus on our illness and not be able to do hardly anything. So I like that you combine those and that
Mhm.
you realize that you can show up in a different way. It doesn't have to be either or. You're all in or you're not in at all. I think that's really important. And you said just so much, living with chronic pain. I've had some kind of chronic pain my daughter's whole life. It started out with migraines before
Mhm.
she was even born. And then when she was 3, I started developing arthritis. And then when she was 5, I ended up with fibromyalgia.
Mhm.
So I've got that's all she's ever known. And we've had to do different things. Like when she was a baby and we needed to get her off of the pacifier, I knew that I wasn't going to be able to handle that crying, not because I was going to get irritated, but because it was going to cause my migraines to get worse. So we put that off on my sister-in-law. We dropped her off for a couple of days, like a day and a half, and my sister-in-law dealt with all the crying because I knew I wasn't going to be able to do it. And in a way that's just one of the first things that made me feel guilty. I mean, and I used to travel with her a lot, and she would, cry in the back seat, and my migraine would be going, and I would have to put on, AirPods or earbuds and turn up my really soft music pretty loudly so I could kind of drown out her crying, because me hearing my baby cry just makes me sad. and and not being able to do anything about it. And now that she got older, like I wish I could be the room parent. I wish I could take her back to the zoo, but it hurts me to walk. And I wish I could do all of these different things, volunteer for the PTA and be more involved with her school. But those are things I can't do. But one of the big things that I've learned is that, like you said, we can show love in different ways. So I can't, necessarily take her to the zoo or to the park, but I can play Barbies with her, lying on the bed, or play a board game lying on the couch, and she'll move all the little pieces. And I don't really have to do anything. It's just all about being present. And I'm positive that my daughter feels loved by me. I know she does. Like there's not a doubt, but there's still a lot of mom guilt. So like at what point did you realize in your life that you needed to stop beating yourself up for all these things you couldn't do in the way that in ways that you used to be able to do them, and you decided that you kind of needed to start forgiving yourself? How did that happen?
Yeah, well, there was a lot of therapy and a lot of personal growth work, I can tell you that.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I learned along the way is it's a great saying from, I think it's Alcoholics Anonymous, that says expectations are premeditated disappointments.
uh
So I had to start looking at what was the expectation that I had, right? And we, of course, when we're young and we're just having a baby, like we see this perfect, like growing pains life. I'm from the Gen X. So like we see
Me
these
too.
perfect TV sitcom kind of, this is how, raising children is going to be. But a lot of them don't take into account that we have chronic illnesses, or depression. Like I never saw Michael Keaton's or Michael J. Fox's mom suffer with depression for
Yeah.
years at a time, And so these are things that people don't really talk about, that these are real. When I say be gentle with your humanness, this is part of it. We're not robots, unfortunately. We can't just trade out parts and go, oh, I have a migraine. I'm just going to get a new brain.
Yeah.
And so we have to just be gentle and understand that things do change and that we can do the best we can. And looking back, I mean, going through it, would I go back and do some things different? Of course. But anybody, whether you have chronic pain or not, would look back and probably say, oh, I could have done some things better. So understanding that the things that we could have done better or we wanted to do better are just different. And there's also this piece of forgiveness, forgiveness for myself, apologizing to my son that that's the way it turned out, that I can't do much more. And then, I have like this whole method in my coaching called intentional and aligned. And so I guess when my son moved across the country, we decided to move across the country. That's why I live in the Southwest now. And right before we moved here, thousands of miles away from our home, he stopped talking to me for 6 months. Like he would not answer the phone. I couldn't get him on the phone. He just told me he needed to take a break from our relationship. And then, of course, all the stories I told myself. Looking back, he probably would have done that whether I was sick or not. He needed time with his dad. He wanted to know his dad, and his dad lived thousands of miles away. But that entire time that he wasn't talking to me, I was like, well, what can I do, right? I can't control how this child feels or thinks or what he wants. What can I control? And that goes back to me, right? And so, how do I want to show up? I want him to know that he's loved. So, I created this little ritual for myself, which was every day my neighbors would watch me stand in my backyard with my arms wide open, just sending him love. I mean, is that something really actionable? I don't know that he felt that love, but I know that my intention was fulfilled to just send him love. And so I created little rituals for myself that I could do, even with my chronic pain and whatnot. And I could send him that love. And then, therefore, I felt good about it because I was doing the only thing I really could do. I mean, don't get me wrong, I still texted him, I still called him, and I left him messages just to let him know I love you, I'm thinking of you, I'd love to talk. And the day after we moved to the Southwest, we went out to dinner and he looked at me and he goes, Mom, I just want you to know that that was more about me than it was about you.
Oh.
It's like, oh, good. The therapy that I put you in when you were young really, really had an impact, right? So I think that we forget that they actually manage with it better. They didn't have the same expectations that we had as parents. They just, I mean, I really believe that, every kid is best off if they're just feel loved and safe. Like that's really what they want. And that's what I wanted for him, right? So those became my intentions. How can I let him know that he's loved and he's safe? And that's how I started showing up. I could have been the parent who nagged and got angry that he wasn't talking to me. I think it's kind of immature because then you're kind of getting down on their level and you're not actually showing them how to have a good relationship. But he knew the entire time that I was thinking of him, that I didn't share my depression around it with him because at that time he didn't need that pressure. He didn't need to know that what he was doing, just like you wouldn't scream in the back seat of your child and go, I can't take your screaming, stop freaking screaming, right? Like you wouldn't do that because
Right.
that's not going to be helpful, right? And yet there are a lot of parents that kind of take their frustrations out on their children because they're like, I want you to listen to me. I want you to talk to me. And instead, they're just like, I knew that if I just held this bowl of love for him, that at some point he would come back. And so it's really about just showing up the way that you want to show up and not in reaction to what's going on for them. Because for me, my son would probably tell you that it wasn't about my chronic illness or anything. There was other things that were going on. we are making that up in our heads that it has to be a different way. There's lots of people who grow up poor and cannot go to the Wiggles or the Sesame Street or do
Mhm.
all of those things. There's plenty of people who have all different kinds of issues in which that's not possible, including chronic pain, obviously. Um, but again, those children, they didn't have the same expectations. They have wants? Of course they have wants. And they can go do those things when they get older too, on their own.
True.
And so it was like a lot of forgiveness I did with my therapy. And then, like I said, my intentional align method is made like this was made for not just midlife women. It's easier in midlife because we're kind of let go of our children. And so we can give ourselves some space from that. But it's really about determining how do you want to feel, right? So if I want to feel really good about my parenting, I get that, going places and doing all the things with him isn't possibility. But there, like you said, there's a million other ways that we can do it. Reading books to our kids at night, and having connection time. I think that's what kids want more than anything, even though in their teenage years they'll tell you they don't. They still do.
Mhm.
And so, really just showing up. Like I had decided that I wanted to show up like love, and that was it, like unconditional love. And once I did that, I could let go of the anger and some of the shame that I can't show up the way that I want to. But how can I? I could be curious about the possibilities of how can I show up like love. And I think moving
Mhm.
across the country to finish his high school with him, that was one way that I showed love, changing my life so that I could hold that space for him was love, letting him uh, disconnect from me because that's actually quite a normal thing for sons to want to do with their mothers. It's actually quite healthy for them to say, I'm not my mom, so let me go know my dad. And so accepting that that separation is really part of it, right? And I don't think that anyone gets to do all of the things they wanted to do with their kids. And do I see other people with great relationships with their kids and get a little jealous? Of course we do.
Yeah.
Of course we do, especially when we're going through those hard times. And if we can just say, how do I want to show, how am I going to feel good about showing up? And then really follow through on that. I think it's the most essential thing. And really, looking at how we're like honestly how the our intentions are, right? That's what I'm all about is intentions. What is my intention? Again, I want him to feel loved and safe. Like happy will come if he feels loved and safe to me. And so as long as that's my intention, I'm going to adjust all of the ways that I speak and act and show up for that to be the center focus, not for me to get the answers. Because to this day, I still don't have answers about what do you mean it was about you and not about me? Like, what were you going through? My son's not a big talker, so he's not gonna share all of that with me. I know that he's got other people he can share that with, and that's perfectly fine with me. But I had to step back from the first 5 years of his life. I was the center of his world. He was like my mini me, right? So it was really letting go of that, knowing that it wasn't just my illness. That's just the normal kind of way that relationships go between sons and moms in many ways. And a lot of that is healthy. Like he was my mini me. And then we introduced a new step parent, and then that changed things too. And then his dad moved away. So that's why all of those things I put him in therapy. So I am really, really, I look back and I'm like, okay, all of that shame, but I did pay for a lot of therapy. So,
Yeah.
so he was actually really well taken care of. And I mean, one thing I would mention is when I was taking him to therapy, because his grades dropped as soon as his dad moved away. Um, After about a year, the therapist was like, Christina, I think you need to go see a counselor because I was depressed. And the way I grew up, depression wasn't something that you actually fixed. You just put on your big girl pants and keep going, right? And I didn't get a counselor. And then she was like, Christina, your son is going to be okay when you're okay. And that was crushing because I'm not going to go do all of that stuff for myself, but you're telling me I'm impacting the way that I'm showing up for my child. Then all of a sudden it became really important for me to go to therapy because I didn't want to have that impact on him. And thankfully, I mean, I'm so thankful that she said that to me that one time because I was like, oh, this is important, like it's just like we can ignore all the things that are going in on our body, but once it starts having a negative impact on our children, then all of a sudden we're like, ooh, something really needs to change because that is not my intention is not to create a depressed child by any means.
Yeah.
And so therapy really, really helped me. And so I encourage people that are out there, go find a therapist. You may not think that you need one, but your chronic illness, your chronic pain can definitely impact the way that we show up as a parent, even if it's unconscious. And so, that your therapist can help you work through how it is that you want to and can show up as a parent. I'm getting tears in my eyes because it was such an impactful moment in my life where I was like, no, no, I'm fine. I'm fine. And they're like, you're not fine. You're having a negative impact on your son. I mean, she didn't say it in that way, but that's a story that I told myself. And that was so hard to hear, and yet the thing I needed to hear. And it really, I can't say that I wasn't sick after that. I was still sick. In fact, my gut problems got worse as I went through therapy. But at some point, I went to health coaching school to figure out if I could fix it myself because doctors couldn't fix it. And by doing all of that work, and I also work within a women's organization, doing that work, like all of the work that I did was the way I got to, okay, so how am I going to feel good about myself as a mother? What is it that I actually need him to have? Because not everybody has the ability to walk around the zoo. Not everybody has the ability to do all those things. So how can I really show up in a way where I'm going to look back and be like, right, I did what I could without trying to control my child.
And I resonate with so much of that. I actually teared up when you told me what your therapist had said, like, because that was really, really powerful. And I talk a lot about like what kind of legacy we want to leave for our children. And when my body pain, kept me from being able to work, I went into a really deep depression. I've got depression, anxiety anyway, but this was really bad. Like I spent all my days in bed, and that was about 2 years of my life. And I don't know what it was, but one day I just looked at my daughter. She was 5, and I thought, this is not how I want her to remember me,
Mm,
in bed, depressed, and in pain all the time. So I don't know what I have to do, but I have to do something different. And so I started just doing things differently. I went through a Bible study at my church, well, not a Bible study, but a book study about how, what to do when life isn't going the way that you had planned it. And I realized that like my life didn't have to be over. I could still do something with my life. I could still be a good mom. I could help other people with chronic pain, whatever it was I chose to do. Like I didn't have to just lay there and let my life basically be over and just basically die like that. And I've come to the point where I'm like, I realized that it was a legacy thing. Like a legacy is a lot more than just a house that you leave for your child. It's how you're remembered. And as she grows up, I want her to remember the exact same things that you're talking about: feeling loved and feeling safe. Love is one of my like top core qualities, like one of my top six. I think it's in my top six. It is 5 or 6. And I think it's really important. And there's no doubt that despite everything, all my illnesses and my, mental health struggles, I know my daughter feels physically and emotionally safe. And I know
mm,
she feels loved. And that's exactly the, what makes me feel good as a mom. So I've got all this mom guilt that, I haven't done her laundry yet this week.
mm,
And I can't volunteer for a Valentine's Day party tomorrow. I'm going to go, but I'm probably going to have to find a place to sit because it hurts me to stand. But she usually has a chair already ready for me, right by her. So she kind of helps with that. But I think it helps the guilt some, just knowing those two things are really there. She does feel safe and she does feel loved.
Mm. And I would also say, like, we want to show up the way that we would want them to show up for themselves, right? So if
Mm,
I think, not that we would ever wish this on our children, but should they have similar problems when they have kids, how would we want them to take care of themselves? And I don't think that we really thought about, I didn't think about that anyway. I'll use an I statement, but I didn't really think about that. And it's like, yeah, if my son has chronic gut issues and depression, how do I want him to treat himself? I don't want him to be sitting in bed shaming himself that he can't go
yeah.
do all the things. And what would I want him to do? I would want him to take really good care of himself. And I
Mhm.
think that that part was really hard for me. What do you mean I have to slow down? I got lists of things to do, right? I have work, I have, all these volunteer things that I want to do. I have a husband, I have children. Like I want to do all of these things. And instead, slowing down and actually learning to take care of myself in a good way opened me up to more energy to be able to do all those things, right? Like going to therapy, taking the time to go to therapy, which I never would have done before, right? That was what I needed in order to really take care of me. And so I think that we can also look at not only am I showing up the way that I want to, but I'm modeling for my child how to take care of yourself and really focus on that so that you can better show up for them. So, yeah, that's what I would want, right? Like, we would be
Yeah.
really sad if your daughter grows up and gets migraines, and then all of a sudden she's like, falling into a depression and doesn't want to do anything. Like, I would so much prefer to see her taking care of herself in whatever ways she can so that she can have, the best quality of life that she possibly could. And for a lot of us, that means slowing down because, again, we forget that we're not robots, that just because we know the program doesn't mean that we can run it that way every day because we're not mechanical. We have thoughts and feelings and physicalities and, physiology that doesn't always work the way that we want it to. So, if what we're doing is just creating a model of what it looks like to love and keep our kids safe while taking really good care of ourselves, I think that that's really essential too. And then it gives them permission to take care of themselves as they raise themselves and raise their kids.
I think that's such a good point because our kids do watch us,
Mm,
and they're, they might grow up and do exactly what we do, whether we're taking care of ourselves or not. I remember like growing up, like you said, depression just wasn't a thing that you dealt with or talked about. If it was really bad, you would go, fix yourself, but never talk about it, you
hmm
know? And so that's been something that we've wanted to do differently, since luckily, mental health is becoming more acceptable to talk about, which I'm so glad. I mean, maybe that's the one good thing that came out of COVID is a lot of people were just really struggling with mental health and started admitting it. So, it's not a big deal to say you took your kid to therapy. My kid was in therapy. She would be in therapy right now, except my husband lost his job. But as soon as he gets another one, we get insurance, she's going right back because she needs it. And I put off putting her in therapy for a while when she was young. Like she was 5, and I started thinking, is this normal? And her anxiety and her anger. And I'm like, oh, it's probably just a stage. And then she was 6. I was like, okay, I don't want to be the mom who's just throwing her kid in therapy. It just didn't sound right to me.
mm
But, by the time she was 7, I realized, okay, she's got some mental health issues that need to be worked on. And so, I don't necessarily broadcast to strangers that my daughter's in therapy or takes medications for her issues, but I know that that's the right thing for her because like the way I view things like that is, we want to be the best version of ourselves that we can be. And I certainly want that for my daughter.
Mhm.
and for myself as well. That's and she doesn't like taking medications, but that's what I tell her. Like, you need to be the best version of yourself. And that's what we all want for you. And I think that's what you want too. So these are things that we just need to do. And I think, I'm not a therapist, but I've been in plenty of therapy in my life. But I mean, it sounds like all these things that you have, besides the stories you were telling yourself, when your son moved away, that, came from your mom guilt, the way that you handled that situation and the way that you're handling just forgiveness of yourself seems very healthy. Do you feel like you're doing a pretty good job of that? Because it sounds like you are.
Yes, yes. And to your point, like my mother suffered depression. She'll never tell you that. But I mean, we all could see it. Like we all saw it. Like she even told me the other day, I never went through menopause. And I was like, I'm pretty sure we could tell you the years that you went through menopause. Like,
Yeah.
so, I mean, I think that, yeah, I think that we are new generations and we find new ways to take care of things. Actually, within a week of my son deciding, he was already in the Southwest when he decided he wanted to stay with his dad. He was visiting for the summer. And so I called together 10 women and said, I just need you to sit here while I process the grief that my active parenting is done. Like I'll get them for summers or whatever, but my active everyday, that's so much different. The vacation dad or the part-time dad or part-time mom is so much different than like doing the schoolwork and doing the chores and all of that was done. And there was a part of me that I needed to grieve that. And so one of the healthiest things I did was call 10 women, and all of them but one who was across the country on a business trip came. And they just held space for me. And they challenged the stories that were in my head that I was like, oh, I'm no longer a mom. You're still a mom. It's just a new phase, right? Like,
Mm.
and starting to unravel all of those untruths because we can tell ourselves a lot of garbage that is not true. And that's where a lot of the shame I think comes from is like we're just telling ourselves these garbage stories that maybe we're projecting that other people are thinking about us. But really taking care of ourselves is different. My mother never did that. And I kind of wish she would have when she was in her 30s and 40s and 50s. She went through a lot. Um, and it really impacted our household. Like you could feel it, when they say when mom's not happy, no one's happy.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
certainly can be true, and so yeah, I highly encourage anybody who's like feeling severe mom guilt or mom shame, like, or, parent shame, whatever that is. I'm not trying to exclude the men. I'm sure they go through it too. That go see therapy, decide how you really want to show up and then show up that way, regardless of how they react to it, because it's not our job to react to our children. It's our job to
Mhm.
kind of, I don't like the term lay down the law, but lay down the normalcy of, yeah, these are bumps in the road. Sometimes we get ill and we don't want to, but trying to push through it all the time all also just made me really even more sicker and more
Yeah.
resentful and more angry. And so get the support that you need. There are people out there that can help you move through this in a good way, unravel those stories, start telling yourself, what is actually the truth in all this garbage that I'm telling myself, because I call it the suffering spiral. Once we get on that suffering spiral, whoo, I can remember back to that one time when he was in daycare and I didn't show up on time. They did all the science experiments without me there. And like, I never seen my kid so crushed that I had missed something. And it was like, wow. I mean, it still hurts, right? I'm not trying to say that once we work through these things, they don't hurt. But it's like we've accepted them. We're like, yep, there was that time because I'm not perfect. I mean, that's the truth of it. And trying to acknowledge that I'm not perfect. And especially when I'm not well, I'm really not perfect. And so just allowing ourselves to be a little bit more comfortable with that and accepting that, yeah, no one's the perfect parent. My husband had great, loving parents. that he felt loved and safe. And he can still tell you the wounds that he has from his parents. There are no perfect parents. So if that is our measurement, that's our measure stick, then we are all, we're all lost because we're not going to
Mhm.
get there. But again, as long as we remember that, the perfect childhood doesn't have to include Taylor Swift tickets, or the perfect childhood doesn't have to include everything that they want, as long as they know that someone's there, and is loving and connected to them and that they are safe where they are. I think that that's the most essential thing. As you
Yeah.
as you agree, right? You're saying the
Yeah.
same thing. Do we want them to be happy? Absolutely. I want to show them how they have to create their own happiness, though. And that's what's really important to me, is how do they take care of themselves? And so we can, I mean, that's one of the bonuses of having chronic pain, is we get to show them how to really take really good care of themselves in whatever way they need to.
That's an interesting perspective that I've never thought of, actually.
I mean, I'm not saying that any of us would trade, health for
Mhm.
and there are bonuses to these things. There are bonuses to, like, yeah, that's what I had to do in order to show up to that game. That's what I had to do in order, like I had to choose to show up to 10%, taking really good care of myself, than 0% if I hadn't been taking care of myself. And would I love to show up at 100%? Of course, I would love to show up 100%. And that's just not where my capabilities were at the time. And so getting through that and then having these adult conversations with them, when they get older. My son's 21 now, so I can start to have those. He's at that age where he's starting to come back around and, like, is, talking a little bit more to us. I mean, we've had a relationship since then, but he's just always been a very quiet, kind of hold his cards real close to his chest kind of kid. And so he's just getting to the point where we can have these conversations and really understand, what I was going through, and that I can hear whatever he has to say, and I don't take it on, like, even if
Mm.
he tells me things that he remembers, I can just say, wow, sorry, that's the impact it had on you, rather than trying to make him wrong or make up excuses for it or whatever. I can just say, that sounds hard. I'm sorry you had to go through
Mm.
that.
That's really good. I think talking to our kids is really important. I talk to mine, but not, I don't divulge every single little thing that's going on because, like you said earlier, like she doesn't need that burden. She is 11 years
Yeah.
old. She's got plenty of her own stuff going on with her mental health. She gets headaches and stomach aches, and she's got all this friend drama going on at that age.
Oh, yeah.
And but I do tell her the important things, and I do tell her when I'm not feeling well or when I need to rest or when I can't go play with her. Like I'll tell her, like, I need to lie down for an hour and then I will come play with you,
Hmm.
or whatever that is. And she's very good about being compassionate and not being too impatient. Sometimes she's like, okay, fine, but most of the time she's like, okay, mommy, you know, um, I'll set a timer for an hour and then you can come play with me. And so she'll do that. She'll go entertain herself for an hour and then I'll get up whether I feel like it or not. I promised I would do it, so I'll get up and do it. But she's very empathetic and very compassionate, and I think a lot of that comes from just seeing me struggle with my health for her whole life. And I do want her to see me taking good care of myself, and I do want her to see me doing things that I enjoy and having hobbies and having a community of women. I do, like you said, talked about community. Like I've got a community of women I meet with on Wednesdays virtually. We've all got chronic pain, and so the first thing we do is, like you said earlier, hold space for each other to talk about whatever's been going on. And she knows that I do that whether I feel like it or not, because it's really important for, my mental and my emotional health.
Hmm.
So I think, talking to our kids and just letting them see us doing these things, like you mentioned earlier, is just really, really important.
Hmm. Yeah, they need a model of self-care. It's not something that
Hmm.
society teaches them very easily, I don't think.
Yeah.
It's really a push, achieve your potential kind of culture, which is awesome. And for some of us overachievers, it can actually be the cause of illness, between depression and like today, I'm really convinced that I don't go to a gut doctor anymore. I do know what kind of foods I can and cannot eat because I've tested it enough times. And every
Yeah.
once in a while, I want to test it again. And then I'm like, right, right. That's why we don't eat that. But that's all stuff that I've learned by really listening to myself. And I don't think that that's taught enough in, wherever, peers, school, whatever. But really taking good care of ourselves and understanding what's going on for ourselves. I really believe it was like really depression led, that a lot of those things were depression led, maybe not depression led, but stress led, where I put so much stress on my life to show up exactly how I wanted to, and get all the things, the college degree while I'm working full time and all of the things. That in my 30s, I just didn't understand why I couldn't do it anymore. But like I sacrificed so much to hit those goals that I didn't enjoy life in my 20s. I mean, I made a lot of stupid mistakes, don't get me wrong, we all do that. But I really, my 20s were all about striving to check off all those boxes that my mom told me you'll be happy when you graduate college and you get the job and the promotion and you can afford a house and a husband and the kids. Well, at 35, I was never more depressed in my life, and I had checked all those boxes. So I think that we forget that, taking care of ourselves. I always say, if you want to be happy when you get there, I've learned you have to take happy with you. So if we want to be well, in 10 years, that means that I have to do the work of self-care, of actually caring for my body, of actually preventing stress or seeing stress happen and go, "Ooh, let me unravel that right now before it loads up on me and I'm sick again." Or, for me, I can't drink, but if I start drinking to like numb the pain or numb the mental pain, whatever that is, then I'm going to be sick. Like I know this, right? So let's not do that anymore, right? And taking better care of ourselves. And I can't imagine, like, I want to live my life so that if my kid mirrored the actions that I took, that he would be okay. And so taking care of myself, going to therapy, looking at my health, looking at how I can slow down a bit, which is anti-culture, but how we
Yeah.
can slow down a little bit to really be conscious about how am I showing up, instead of just rush, rush. We have an addiction to productivity, I think. And so when we learn to put down that productivity and go, what's really important here? Do I want my son to burn out? Is working 70 hours a week, or do I want him to really be enjoying his life and his family and his health by taking care of himself? And, it was always like, I can do that for myself, but I wouldn't want him to do that. Well, what are we teaching then? What are we teaching if we're just gonna, get ourselves into illness and then not be able to show up the way that we want to? It's really about, for me, it was a real big idea to look at it like this is what I'm modeling for him.
Yeah, and you've said probably, I don't know, 100 pieces of advice since we've been chatting. Like if you have just one piece of advice maybe for parents who have that guilt, that mom dad guilt, and aren't the kind of parents that they feel like they quote unquote should be, like what do you think that advice would be?
Decide how you want to show up. For me, it was what I wanted him to remember was that he was loved and he was safe. And then how can you bring that in, right? It doesn't just show up by me saying, "Oh, I love you." Like how are you actually living that? And making that really important because when I started making not just love and safety for him important, but also love and safety for myself, I started showing up the way that I wanted to. And when I look back, I never feel guilty about those
Mm,
things. I never feel shame about the times that I sent him love from my backyard, even though I don't know that that actually reached him, right? Like I'm not that woo-woo. So, but it was like one of the most woo-woo things I did was just send him love and just consciously do that like a prayer. Um, but it made me feel good. It made me feel like I was doing my job as being loving and, creating safety for him and having a relationship that I knew he could come back to. So
I think that's
decide how you
great.
want to show up and then show up that way and make that your priority. And I mean, this is how I run all of my coaching, just so we're clear. Like, this isn't just for parents. This is like, I do this with midlife women who don't have pain. Like, what is it that you actually want to feel when you look beyond that vision board with the happy, smiling faces on it, or the big house, or the fancy car? How is it that you actually want to feel? Like, because that's why we put the things on our vision board, because we expect that we're going to feel a certain way when we get there.
Mm,
So if we can kind of like life hack that by saying, well, let me get to how I actually want to feel, because there's a million ways I can feel that way today. I don't need the fancy car. If a house for me represents safety and security, then that's what I want to feel. So how can I infuse that into my day now that I am actually safe and secure rather than waiting until I get there? And I think that that's really important for parents just because we only have the 18 years. I mean, we have more than that, but like actively, we only have the 18 years and then they can basically go do what they want. And most psychologists will say that our kids are kind of programmed by the age 8, that they have a real understanding of who they are in the world, how they feel, how they show up, and what they think by the age 8. Their morals and values are all kind of built in by then. And so I think, it's a little bit more essential for parents to do it right away because
mm.
it is so short. Like my son's 21, I can tell you it's so short.
Yeah, I try not to think about how many, summers I've got left and how many
Mm,
days and hours because that just gets really depressing.
mm.
Um, so if somebody's interested in your coaching or your podcast, where can we get more information about you?
Yeah, for my podcast, you can go to invitingshift.com. And for my coaching, you can find more at christina-smith.com. And there's all kinds of resources there. There's a confidence toolkit that's there that might help. I mean, it's a midlife confidence toolkit, but anybody can use it. Confidence is something that we can use all the time. And especially if you want to feel confident parenting while you're feeling chronically ill, I think that it's actually a really excellent toolkit for that. So you can get all of that on my website.
Awesome. And I'll have those links in the show notes so people can just click
Thanks.
right on them. All right.
Thanks.
Well, thank you for coming on. I think it's been a really good conversation and just kind of raw and admittedly kind of emotional.
Yeah, yeah. I encourage everybody just to be gentle with your humanness. We're not indestructible robots like we like to believe. So just be gentle with that. And thank you for having me on. It was really a touching conversation for me too.
All right. Thank you. Make sure to subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss any health, parenting, or life advice. For my freebie 30 ways to relieve pain without taking a pill, go to ithurtstomom.com/tips. If you have comments, suggestions, or want to be on this podcast, email me at ithurtstomom@gmail.com. I wish everybody a blessed and pain-free day.